All right, everyone, welcome to this bonus episode of NASS. We have hit October, and you know what that means. The best season for us horror fans. And what do we want to do here? We have a new show on Shudder called Horror's Greatest.
Real horror fans love exploring the boundaries of the genre.
I'm scared to death. This is awesome!
What better movie could you ask for?
And we wanted to cover each episode here on this episode. So, with that being said, I'm your host for this episode, Jose.
I am not your host, Spookmaster Flex.
Oh, you got
Oh,
a fancy
he did.
name. We're just
He
we're
did
just
a
Marie
name.
and Jose.
George wanted to be extra on this one. He was like, all right.
Yeah.
All
Good
right,
one.
perfect. With that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into the first episode. So the first episode of this show, it covered tropes and cliches, which funny enough, we actually did an episode on this, I believe, might have been last Halloween.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
last
put the
Halloween.
link up in corners.
Yeah, it'll be somewhere around here. But we did an episode on this, so it was good to see a different perspective on some of these tropes and cliches. So, we'll start with you on this one, Marie. They went through a variety of cliches. What was the favorite cliche mentioned?
My favorite cliche slash trope is definitely that they mentioned is cabins in the woods. That's my absolute favorite. I mean, I wanted to say Final Girl because there's just so many epic legendary Final Girls, but if you got me in the woods in a cabin and it's a horror movie, that's my absolute favorite.
Sure, that was kind of like the variety pack of tropes and cliches. One
Yeah,
movie, they
right.
just gave you a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
But that was a good pick. What about you, George? What was your favorite trope or cliche that was mentioned on the episode?
One of mine that was a standout because I used to think about it growing up was the car not starting.
What's wrong with the truck?
Come on, let's go! What's the matter?
What's wrong? Why is the car starting?
Like that one, like because growing up, I'm pretty sure like most of us did, our parents had a manual car. It was a stick shift. And anything with a clutch generally would jam up. Like there's that possibility where you could have a situation where your car wouldn't start. Generally, people who didn't know how to drive the car. My dad was good at driving, so it didn't happen often. But like I knew plenty of other people who had that issue. But I feel like once we got manual cars, and especially nowadays with electric cars, that never happens. It's a zero happening situation. And I just loved how like over time it still would, like till this day, you'll still get that trope where people just have trouble starting their cars. It's like, how is it still a thing? But it's still so fun. It's like, oh my God, this is never going to go away. Like I can imagine there's going to be a time where cars will start just by you opening the door and being inside of them, and they'll still figure out a way to have it where it's like, why is it starting? I'm sitting on the chair. Why isn't it doing the thing?
Malfunction. There's always the more gadgets they put in cars, the more things that can malfunction. So it actually maybe is working in horror's favor,
Maybe
Yeah,
voice
pretty soon
activated
we
cars, yeah.
yeah, pretty soon we're all gonna have our own kit. They'll just ask, hey, you want me to start? And that's it, like it'll start for us.
Yeah.
But but this is something that we've talked about multiple times. I think we even also had an episode on that of just like certain things. And Marie, I believe that was with you. Certain things that just no longer really work the way they did in horror before, unless you said it in like past times. And car issues, one of the things that were talked about. The cars right now are so advanced. I don't even need to use my keys to open my door. Never mind.
Yeah.
Uh, do that. So that whole fumbling of the keys and all of that stuff. No, I put my hand to the door, it unlocks. That's it. I'm good.
Right? You press a button, the car's on.
It's I can even do it on my phone on the way to the car, at one point. So I think one of the tropes that I had to choose was the curse book. The curse book. We've seen it in all different iterations. It comes through different names depending on what it is that you're seeing it on. You know, the Evil Dead one is one of the most famous ones that there is. But even in comic books, we see it, which you know, and it's not always necessarily horror itself. It can be more sci-fi sometimes. But I feel that's one that can stand the test of time. You know, there can always be a book, unless we're living in that, what was it, Fahrenheit
Oh yeah,
movie where
where all
they
books are
burn all the
burned.
where the books are burned. So I wanted to pick that cliche because I feel like it doesn't matter if you're setting the movie in the 1700s or if you're setting the movie now or 30 years from now, you can always have a cursed book. So I thought that was a good one. Now, was there anything that you disagreed on that was talked about in this episode? We'll start with you, George.
It's not so much of a disagreement, but I felt like it was kind of left out, I guess, was a
Mhm.
pairing with the cursed book thing, which is cursed items in general. I feel like that could have just
Mhm.
been a whole thing as opposed to just the book. Because there's so many movies where I think of like Hellraiser. You have the lament box, you know, like that's a cursed item. The Ouija board is a cursed item. So I feel like that's just something
Mhm.
that transcends all kind of films, is that idea.
No, I agree with that 100%. There's so many, and then they keep coming out with more cursed items. I
Yeah.
mean, we just literally saw the curse like mummified hand last year with one of the biggest movies in Talk to Me. So they're always finding new things to like curse.
Yeah. There's cursed video games and stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm. When you see some of these horror tropes and cliches and stuff, it's kind of heartwarming in a way because it's like, oh yeah, that's my old friend, you know. It's just kind of, it's been like through horror, all these certain things that when you see it, it's just like, oh, I feel like I'm in like a horror movie now because they're adding that one little thing. It's like every Christmas my grandma makes these specific cookies and every horror movie has this specific thing, so it's kind of like a heartwarming thing. But yeah, I agreed with everything. And the cursed objects thing, like that's never ending. Like cursed objects will, anything can be cursed. And look at like Annabelle and The Conjuring. It's like they have like a whole freaking room that, like, that franchise can just be unstoppable because they can just pick every random thing in that museum and make a movie about it.
Well, please
Yeah.
stop it. And maybe stop
Yeah,
but
I
please
agree. I
stop it
agree.
already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one thing that I was like sitting there watching. I'm like, I don't agree with you, sir.
Mm.
Okay, and that was when one of the guys, I forget who it was saying that when they were talking about the dumb decisions that characters make in the movies, and you know, you can't be a horror fan without having witnessed tons of idiotic, you know, nonsensical decisions that are made by characters in order to keep the plot going along. And, you know, one of the people in there said that to think that we would not make those same actions is delusional.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
no, I don't agree there, sir. Certain decisions in there that are so beyond logic and sensical that it's very hard to believe. I know I won't make that mistake. I know you guys won't make that mistake. You might get maybe like 1% of the population that will make that mistake. Now, if you were to say there's certain cliches that you can't sit back and say, "Oh, that would never happen to me," like, you know, the fumbling of the keys when you're trying to get into a house, things like that. We've had videos proven that
Yeah.
actually can happen when people run these tests themselves, getting chased by you know, a fake Michael Myers. 1 out of the 10 people actually make it inside the house. That is fine, but when it comes to common sense and decision making, to say that it's delusional to think that we won't do better, I don't agree with that.
Delusional was a
Yeah.
bad word choice that they used. Like delusional was a bad word choice. I
I
like that was a little too far.
I agree with this so wholeheartedly because I just recently watched In a Violent Nature, and there's one of the best kill scenes in that movie is the girl doing the yoga on like the cliffside, and she sees him and she has so much time to like
I know.
she turns around, sees that there's an incline cliff that she could easily just dive down and end up in the water and get away, or she could just like turn left or right and just run. And instead she just stays there and waits for him to punch through her. And as it's still happening, she turns around like, "What up, bro?" It's like, what's happening right now?
Um,
This is the most stupidest thing ever. I love how it looked. It was gorgeous. But it's just like that decision making. It's like, running never came into your head? All this yoga and stretching, and you didn't use that to run? Like, what's you were pretty much
What's the
prepped for
purpose?
this situation.
It's true.
Delusional, George.
Yeah.
Delusional. No, in that situation with 7 possible ways to escape, you're not escaping.
I'm choosing death every time.
Exactly. Maybe I can take this punch. They did go through a lot of like cliches that, they had the dumb decisions, the girl running up the stairs, splitting up, horny
Splitting up.
teens must die, the murderous rednecks, which I'm glad they talked about Tucker and Dale,
Yeah.
which kind of
Yeah.
flipped that on his head. So I'm glad they did that. Was there any tropes or cliches that you were like, oh, I felt like this could have easily been added to this episode, but they didn't discuss?
I felt like they didn't really hit upon the sacrifice, or like the sacrificing of a virgin kind of thing.
Seems like a waste of a perfectly good virgin to me.
Like they mentioned like the whole like virgin
Horny.
thing and the horny teenager stuff like that, but they didn't really like mention the sacrifice. Like I've seen plenty of films where sacrificing someone's important. Like they mention Cabin in the Woods. The
Yep.
point of Cabin in the
Mhm.
Woods is they have to sacrifice those kids to fit like their quota for the gods. And that's a whole trope within itself, which is sacrificing someone. So I was surprised that didn't get mentioned at all.
No, that's a good call. The one that came to mind, and it was actually funny because it was mentioned in one of the movies that we're talking about, and it's the not really dead trope. They talk about Scream, and they make a point about the killer always comes back, double tapping. So they didn't really touch too much on we see it in horror movies all the time. When you think they're dead, you mentioned In the Violent Nature, and Maria and
Yeah.
I, when we were discussing that movie, they play off of that trope at the end to create tension in it. It's the killer's never dead. The killer might be coming back aspect. So I was surprised they didn't touch on that one.
Yeah.
Like there's some that they just breezed over. So all the episodes in the series like breeze over a whole bunch, and then they focus on like 5 like in particular. So they did breeze, and they did breeze over the dead not dead. They showed a little bit of Halloween 2 in there too. And I think that was that episode where it's like Michael, and they're like, "Don't touch him," and then the cop's just sitting there. What? It's like, have you ever seen a horror movie, Mr. Policeman? Like, obviously. So yeah, they did touch on it, but they did breeze a little bit over it. Yeah.
Yeah, never get close to the killer.
No.
All right,
Unless you're
in
like
Scream 6.
the cops,
You would
always the
think-
dumb cops.
Yeah.
You would think by the 6th movie he would already have all these rules down packed, and he still makes the same mistake. So, but I'm delusional.
Yeah. Jose took that one personal.
Yeah.
Personal
Well, it was too
attack.
far.
Jose like, I've been
Too
through
far.
some shit. I run.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Hispanic. I'm out of there. One of the other things that I didn't agree with is when they didn't go into depth, but when they were mentioning tropes, they mentioned paranoia as a trope. But I don't feel paranoia is a trope. That's like saying fear is a
Yeah.
trope. That's just it's an emotion, something that you're feeling. I don't think it's a trope. So that was another thing I didn't agree with.
Yeah, I'd argue that every horror movie's goal is to make you feel that way.
Mhm.
Exactly. That's the
Yeah.
yeah. You want to feel tense and yeah, exactly. Anxious. That's the point.
Yeah, if paranoia is a trope, then fear is a trope because they all have fear. Or at
Yeah.
least attempt to have fear.
Mhm.
What was you guys' overall thoughts on the episode, Marie? We'll start with you.
I love personally, they talked about Cabin in the Woods a lot in this one, right? It was not the comedy one. I thought it was this one.
They mentioned
a lot of
Cabin in the Woods
tropes
in this one. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, because Cabin in the Woods covers like almost all the like very distinct tropes and overused tropes. And I like this episode a lot. It's probably it might be maybe my second least favorite out of the whole series, but I still enjoyed it. And I like anyone who hasn't seen Cabin in the Woods, I just think it's the most masterfully done, brilliant, hilarious movie that about horror movie tropes that there is. And I find it weird though that they did have like a category called cabins in the woods, because I don't really find that like a trope. It's more like a setting, but I'm glad they added it though, because I do love seeing a movie like that. But yeah, that's good.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, like yourself, there's a handful of things where you kind of felt like, oh man, they could really dive into this thing that they're just skimming over. So like I almost kind of felt like the first episode could have been an hour to an hour and a half long, just really diving into all of the different things that there are. And I would have been okay with that. And every other episode following being like 45 minutes could have been fine because they're really more fine-tuned into what they're talking about. But that one was just so massive in what it could really talk, like really dive into. I feel like there were some missed opportunities per se, but it was still enjoyable. It got me primed and ready to see what was next.
No, no, I agree. I enjoyed it. I think one of my favorite aspects of this episode that I like that they did with certain tropes and cliches is that instead of just talking about the basic one, with some of them they actually showed the evolution of the trope. So like the use of car, they started talking about the car not starting and all that, but they went into as time has evolved, how they've used the car in different ways and kind of evolved the trope over time. So I like that they did that because as time goes on, as things change, some of these tropes either have to change or they become cliche and become annoying to some people, or you have to eliminate them completely unless you set something in another time frame. So I like that aspect of the episode.
I will point out, I also like there was this random thing that popped up, and it was the trope of Clint Howard, and just like his appearance in a film. And I remember growing up, if I saw Clint Howard in a film, that set the tone of what kind of movie I was watching. Like, I'm not watching a Ron Howard film. No, I'm watching a Clint Howard film. All right. Don't take this too seriously now.
Yeah.
And this is still proven till this day because me and Marie watched a Christmas movie last year where Clint Howard was like the sheriff of the town. I don't know if you remember that. The Hulk Hogan movie.
Was he the sheriff? I remember the Hulk Hogan movie. He was the sheriff?
He was the guy, yeah.
Okay. Oh gosh.
As soon as you see him, you just go into this position. All right.
Yeah.
Bring
I'm
it.
going for a ride.
Ready. Mm-hmm.
Moving on to episode 2. This one focused a little bit more on something very specific, and this revolved around giant monsters. This is right up George's alley. Overall. So with that being said, I'll start with you, George, on this one. What was your favorite monster that they talked about in the episode?
I mean, I think it goes without like much guessing here. Like it's Godzilla. It's always been Godzilla. Only with like a close second to Gamera, because I did love Gamera growing up also. But Godzilla was the one I would marathon Godzilla films as a child with my mom and dad. It was the best.
I'm gonna say I would marry Godzilla. I would marry Godzilla.
Yeah.
I mean, Godzilla would be a pretty dope spouse. I'm just saying. No one's messing with you when Godzilla's by your side.
Godzilla be the one to lock me down.
Yeah. And I want to see people like, I love all Godzilla. I was at that good age. It's kind of those people who I grew up with like Return of the Jedi. If you grew up with that, then you had this love for it, as opposed to like people who grew up on Star Wars and then got that. And you're like, oh, it's too kiddie. I like freaking Papa Godzilla with Minya, and I love good old Godzilla that's the enemy and it's just tearing shit up. I love it all. Godzilla can do no wrong in my eyes.
So pretty much over the last couple of years, you've been living the life. You've gotten different versions of Godzilla that offer different aspects. You've gotten a fun popcorn version, and you've gotten serious emotional version. So you've been living the life.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's the best. Even the worst Godzilla movie is still a fun Godzilla movie.
What about you, Marie? What was your favorite monster out of the ones they talked about? Godzilla?
The same as George. I also grew up watching Godzilla, and I remember having the Rodan VHS, and I'd watch that all the time. And like, Baby Godzilla, was it Manila? Is that the
Minya.
Baby Godzilla's name?
Minya.
Okay, my kids call him Manila, but it's the white pronunciation probably. So, watching that all the time. My dad would put on, I think it's Blue Oyster Cult that has the Godzilla song, I think.
Yeah.
Go,
Yep.
go, Godzilla. We had the record and we put it on and always like dance it, not always, but we danced it in the living room, my brother too. And it's just, my son loves Godzilla. The 1954 movie was his favorite for a long time with subtitles. And now Godzilla Minus One was his favorite movie. And it's just a very close, yeah. And he's seen way more Godzilla movies than me, like a lot. And my daughter has a little Mothra plushie, so it's a big.
Nice.
It's in our hearts. It's in our hearts in this family. So
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to be the different person here. I chose King Kong.
Okay.
I like Godzilla. Don't get me wrong, I like Godzilla, but if I've always had an affinity towards King Kong, just because like he's the giant monster that like you can empathize with all the times. There's a certain humanity to him, where it's like I remember watching it as a kid and being like, leave him alone. Just let him live his life. Like
he just
that's
wants
it.
love.
Yeah.
Yeah, you caused this problem. You did it. All right.
Mhm.
So like, that humanization aspect, that the fact that you can empathize with this giant monster and things like that has always given me an affinity towards King Kong. I know in the newer movies, I've been team King Kong. I'm like, all right, well, if you're gonna face off, you know, I know he probably doesn't stand a chance, but like I want King Kong to throw some hands here against Godzilla. So that's what I had to go with him. They get into, the history of some of these creatures. Well, for the ones that have a long history, such as Godzilla, King Kong. Other ones that don't have a large history, they don't dive that deep into it, like the Tremors creatures, for example. But did you guys learn anything new that maybe you didn't know before? Like I know for myself, one thing I learned is honestly, I didn't know that at one point Godzilla had gotten that like silly. Like Dropkick Godzilla,
Yeah.
Dropkick
Oh yeah.
Godzilla kind of city. Like I didn't know that. Like I've seen some older Godzilla movies and I've seen some newer ones. But it seems like I skipped over the silly period because I that was new for me. I'm like, what is this? Like, what in the WWE is happening with this Godzilla? Like, go ahead.
That's the Godzilla that I mostly remember from my childhood, silly Godzilla,
Yeah.
kind of. I remember that mostly. Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, Dropkick Godzilla.
Jose,
That's
you
one of his.
really got to watch Godzilla on Monster Island then, where it's just like him and his son and they're hanging out with all the other monsters. There's like a scene where Godzilla's teaching Minya how to do the atomic breath. So like he does it and it's badass, and then
Yeah.
Minya tries to do it and it's just like little smoke rings. But he like charges up, he's like and he's trying to help him out, and how he trains him, he ends up stepping on his tail and then he does like a really good one. But it's like this, it's such like slapstick humor with just Godzilla.
Oh, I
It
honestly,
is slapstick.
I don't know if I can do it. Um, I I like my Godzilla like serious and terrifying. Like when I saw Godzilla minus one, I was like, yes. Oh my God, this is amazing. It automatically became my favorite Godzilla movie ever that I've seen. And I love this. And after I watched that, it made it harder to watch the American Godzilla movies that are happening now. I
Yeah.
mean, I still was entertained by them, but it wasn't the same because I was like, ugh, like me personally, I like this version of Godzilla better than this like body cop version of like Godzilla. So like I don't know if I would enjoy that.
I
Marie knows
think
what I'm
it
talking about.
he yeah, Godzilla for me can go both ways. Like
Yeah.
I accept both of his personalities. So I like them both. I learned that I love the movie Tremors, which I never saw until I watched this episode of the monster episode. I'd never seen Tremors in my life. And I
Oh,
was like, okay,
what?
yes, after watching this episode, I was like, okay, I have to watch Tremors. And my husband's seen it. So he's like, yeah, we gotta watch it. So one night we watched it and I was like, holy crap, I adore this film. So I learned that Tremors is amazing for so many reasons. I also learned that Godzilla, I don't know if he's actually based on the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but how that movie came out in 1953 and it was atomic power unleashing a dinosaur creature, and then Godzilla 1950 came out in 1954. So it's like, did they take that from this movie? I don't know if they actually took it or if it's just a coinkydink, but I thought Godzilla was like an original idea, even though it's Godzilla, the depth behind the idea of Godzilla and the metaphor and the personification of like atomic war is so deep. And you really realize that when you're older and you watch the 1954 OG movie and you're like, wow, okay, this is actually a lot deeper than when I was a kid. I was just like, yeah, Godzilla tearing shit up, and it's like, oh wait, this is actually a pretty deep metaphor. But anyway, that's what I learned about that movie before it.
To hit upon what you just talked about, Marie, I want to say that person just worded things wrong, because I think it was in the sense of like film wise, like, certain movies can't happen until certain innovations happen. You know what I mean? So like that first movie was very innovating towards what that was, because you weren't getting those types of films beforehand. It's kind of like Superman being the first superhero. After him, then we had superheroes, and he may not have inspired, let's say, Shazam or something like that, but the fact that they were so close to each other in their appearances, there's like this, thing that connects them.
Yeah.
So I don't think that movie actually really inspired Godzilla. It just opened a door for those types of films to be accepted.
Yeah, it was the way it was worded, where it's like, you
Yeah.
can't have this without this. And I was like, which way should I take this? That's why I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I'm taking it, at least. Because for me, to answer your question, Jose, I didn't learn anything from this episode.
I figured. There's the famous monsters. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel
I
this
mean,
could be a
I
no.
spent over 5 years in a company where we freaking talked about this every day, was monsters, and especially like big monsters. Like, we had the original suit actors at one of our conventions, so it's just like we lived and breathed this every day. But I felt for the most part they did a really good job, at least, of talking about everything and the educating of where a lot of these things came from. If anything, I would say there's one thing I just didn't agree with, which was, besides the thing you mentioned, Marie, was the mist and the insects thing. I was like, I never considered that an insect movie. I was like, okay,
Like a big monster movie?
it's
Like
a big
a
monster movie,
movie?
but I never considered it
Yeah.
an insect movie, because none of the
Oh.
creatures you saw looked like insects from Earth. They looked like monsters or alien-like creatures, or even Cthulhu-like world kind of creatures. That's what I always tied that movie to. I never tied it to real earthly insects. So I thought that was a weird categorization that they made. But besides that, I felt everything was pretty on point.
Now, in this episode, they talked about, we mentioned the Tremors. They talked King Kong, Godzilla. They did the creature from the Host
Yeah.
movie. They talked about him, and even they spent some time on the Cloverfield version of Godzilla for that. Was there any monsters that you were like, that you would add to it, if they were like, okay, add a monster that wasn't talked about? Like, what monster would you add?
Well, since they mentioned them, which was the big ants movie, I was surprised at no point they went over to Food of the Gods. So in Food of the Gods, it's about like an infestation of giant rats. Now, granted, these giant rats aren't the size of like the ants were in them, but they're big enough where they can eat a person. Like, they were giant sized ants, and the whole thing in the movie,
Just too big for my comfort.
yeah. Like, there was like this hormone issue that was being put into like the food or the water or something, so all the rats got really big. They made a sequel of it, and in part 2, a child gets really big. So you see like this moment in a room where this giant child is just like hunched over and he's having a temper tantrum. Imagine like your 3-year-old is all of a sudden like freaking 12, 20 feet tall and is having a temper tantrum. Like,
Give me the
ridiculous.
It's scary enough, like child size. Couldn't even imagine
So
big
yeah, I thought that
size.
was like that was a decent series that could have been mentioned, at least for like a second.
Funny enough, I believe it's not too far off, because I think rats, just like snakes, and I forget some of there. I think there's some of the creatures that technically have no limits to how much they can grow. Like, there isn't like a rat is always this big. Like, they can keep growing decent sizes depending on how much they're actually consuming.
Bigger than a cat,
So,
yeah.
yeah, there was one that I thought, okay, so like at first I was gonna be a no for me, because I'm thinking it was literally called Giant Monsters. So I'm like,
Wow.
okay, you covered most of them. But then they threw in, the Tremors creature in there, and I'm like, it's not really that giant. So I'm like, if we're gonna go by that size, then let me throw in the Queen alien, who was a significant size. And I
Yeah.
feel
Oh
size
yeah.
differential between the Queen alien and the Tremors isn't that much of a difference. So yeah, it's that's set in space, but that's a big monster and a monster you don't want to mess with. So I would have thrown that one in there.
Yeah, no, I
True.
totally agree. Yeah. Okay, I want to do a
Mm.
bonus one. A quick
Okay.
bonus one
Mhm.
for Marie. The movie
Mm.
Colossal with Anne Hathaway,
Oh
where
yeah.
like she has like the second person. Oh, Marie, watch that movie. I guarantee you'll like it. She has,
Colossal with Anne Hathaway.
yeah, Anne Hathaway, and pretty much like she has like an avatar of sorts. That's a
Okay.
kaiju that's like destroying Korea when she's in a certain place in her neighborhood. I don't, if you haven't seen it, I actually don't want to say anything now. I think you'll really enjoy the
Okay.
surprise of it. But that's a
Yeah.
movie
Okay,
that
don't.
it was really good, and I'm surprised it didn't even get shown, let alone mentioned.
It's very, very unique too.
Yeah.
Like unique concept. So I
Hmm.
agree with George.
Okay.
So well, okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
What was everyone's overall thoughts on this episode, George, as the
I mean,
expert?
another fun one. I gotta say, I totally agree with their top five of the Godzilla films. I feel like they nailed it. The top three of Shin Godzilla -1 and the OG could have been interchanged, and I wouldn't even care. But they 100%. Other people have been making Godzilla lists and been getting it wrong, and it angers me every day. I actually had a whole like dispute on, I think it was like comicbook.com or whatever, and like on their Instagram and other things, and I was like, you guys are wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, because they did not have those three in the tops, and I was like, you guys aren't watching the right Godzilla films then. So I thought it was a really fun episode. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it was fun because it was nostalgic, but then I also was exposed to things I've never heard of before, like Big Man Japan. What?
Such a goofy film.
What am I seeing? So I was introduced to a lot of things, but it also felt nostalgic to me. And I remember watching the movie The Host years and years and years ago, and it made me really want to watch it again. So yeah, I'm grateful for this episode.
No, that was this is a great movie. Another monster movie that does not ignore the human element of it and actually makes you care about the humans in there, which we don't get with a lot of US based monster movies where it just becomes let's see the monster destroy. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Overall, I felt it was a good episode. I think they did a good job of mixing it up. You know, you got they talked about the old movies and more modern movies. They talked about more serious movies and more campy movie. So they did a good job of kind of balancing and showing, different versions of just giant monsters instead of just pigeonholing the whole time. Moving on to episode 3. This one dived into Japanese horror. See, Marie seems excited about this one, so I'm gonna start with you, Marie. So they list like quite a few movies in there, give or take. About how many of those have you seen?
I've seen, I wrote them down. Ringu, I'm gonna pronounce it, is Ju-on, The Grudge, whatever. Battle Royale, Audition, I saw just because of this episode. I watched it after. Did they mention Ichi the Killer in this one? I thought for like a split second they did. And Wild Zero I've seen. I own Wild
Yeah,
Zero,
yeah, they did mention Ichi the
actually.
Killer, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've seen, yeah, maybe like 5 or 6 of them only.
I'm in the same boat. I had 6 on my list of like from movies they mentioned. I had movies that I've seen that they didn't talk about, and then there's
Mm,
movies that they mentioned that I've definitely heard of. Because again, working in the monster company at horror films, I have to know about
Mhm.
all of them to some extent. But like a lot of those older films, like Onibara or stuff, like I hadn't watched, and like getting to see more of them because some of them are also just hard to find, nowadays in
Yeah.
good quality and stuff.
mhm.
But yeah, like I've got most of your list, honestly. I think my difference is I had
Mhm.
Uzumaki on there.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I saw like the same films you saw.
Mhm.
Are we about to open a portal? Because I also had 6.
Oh
Ah,
shit!
Oh, 666.
Oh,
I also think I think the difference is I had Niari, the Curse was
Oh,
one of my
okay.
six.
I want to watch that so bad. It's found footage, right? That's on my
Yeah.
list now
Yes,
to
Yeah.
watch.
and that
Yes,
was
it's been on my
really
list for a
good.
while.
Yeah.
And that one is actually on Shutter. So, good to see. That was a good one. All right, so yeah, we're about all about the same page. Just maybe give or take a couple of movies. Getting into specific movies. What was your favorite movie that was covered?
It's kind of like it feels like a cop out, but I loved Ju-on the first time I saw, like, and I don't mind the American one either, but obviously going to the class at the old school one. That movie did something that no other horror film had ever done to me before, which was took away the safety blanket, quite literally. That scene
Yeah.
where like, and I love that they showed it too because it's important between the sound of the sound and then seeing her in the blanket where she's trying to hide, and that takes her. It's like, well, how am I supposed to go to bed now? Like everyone knows growing up, that's home base. Like you go to your bed, you put the blanket over you. I'm protected. No one's gonna get me now. And they just took it away from you. Never mind the fact that this is an entity that will follow you home. The fact that it went that far, it's like that's it. You're done.
No
You
safe
can't
space.
you can't go to sleep because of damn Freddy. And now you got this damn thing who's just gonna take you when you go to bed.
That was a good choice. I almost went with that one. Yeah, like I was going back and forth, so that's a good choice. What about you, Marie? What was your favorite one out of the ones covered?
Battle Royale, even though I haven't seen it in years, I remember when I watched it, I was obsessed. I loved it so much. So Battle Royale, but then Ringu, the thing about that movie is that again, I haven't watched it in years, but The Ring I saw before Ringu, but I watched that because The Ring is one of my favorite horror movies maybe ever. I watched it 7 times in the movie theater when it came out. And I want to go back now to watch Ringu because I think I'll appreciate the simplicity more now than when I was younger. When I first watched it, the more like it looks like it's just more of like a simplistic, clean, intimate movie in comparison to like the American Hollywood one. So I'd go with those two.
Okay, all right, Marie, overachiever, getting an extra one in there.
Sorry.
Uh, I had the ring and Ringu also on there. It was like it was such a good concept that not even a Hollywood adaptation can mess it up because I actually did
Yeah.
like the American one too. That's when you
Love
know
it.
it's a good concept when they can't mess it up at all
Mhm.
when it comes to that. But yeah, it's just it's so good, and I remember just when you finally like see things go down. It's kind of it's unnerving aspect there, and you have the added tension too of the time sensitivity that the characters are going through. So, I think that always helps to add to tension, where on top of the threat that you're having to deal with, now you have a time limit to resolve this. And I think, those two aspects help make both versions very tense where you're locked in for the
Mhm.
movie. So I had to go with that one. So we each saw six out of the list that were in there. Are there any Japanese horror movies that you would add that you've seen and you're like, oh, this should have been added to it. Marie?
The only one that I can think of on the spot that I've seen that wasn't on the list, and I don't even remember if it's good. Again, guys, my memory's so bad, and but it was called Tokyo Zombie, and I don't really remember. I used to be really obsessed with zombie movies, and I'm not really sure if it was good or not, guys, but I remember seeing it. I remember enjoyed it when I watched it, Tokyo Zombie. But let me tell you though about this is I wrote down 9 movies in this episode that I want to watch. 9
Oh yeah, like I
that I
made a
haven't
list for
seen.
myself too of like, oh, I gotta watch these.
Yeah, like this episode had the longest list of ones that I
Yeah.
really wanted to watch.
No, I agree with that 100%. George, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I had a movie. I forgot to like put it in here in my list, but I had it on my phone list, and it was Alive. It's pretty much like this dude gets executed, and then like his spirit or like he comes back and he starts getting like tortured, or like he kind of submits himself to continuously get tortured from like this prison or whatever. There's almost like also like this techno feel to it to some extent. It was a weird movie. Back in the day, I used to go to like Newbury Comics and I would just get foreign films because I couldn't find them like at Blockbuster or anywhere else. And I would just be like, this looks good. And I'd get like 5 movies at a time or whatever.
That's right. When you first mentioned that movie, I thought you were talking about I think it's Korean, the Korean Alive
Is it like
movie, which is
hashtag alive? Right? I think they have like a hashtag in front of it,
yes, the
right?
zombie one.
Yeah. I know what you're
I
talking
thought you were
about.
I thought you were talking about that one. Um, so overall for the episode, like I agree with what you guys said. This is the episode, it made me realize how much I'm missing out on. Because I ended up also building a list. I was like, oh my God, there's so much here that I have not seen. That it's like there's an avenue here that I'm not touching, that I need to, start visiting some of these Japanese horror movies. So that's made this one of my favorite episodes because it provided that for me. It provided things for after I finish this show to be able to go to and catch. What was your guys' overall thoughts on the episode, George?
I kind of felt like this could have been more broader, I guess, to some extent, because I couldn't help but think to myself, just like Asia in general, like Korea. We mentioned Korea a second ago because of the film you saw of the hashtag alive, and I think of like how good they are at horror films also, or even just like more South Asia, like Singapore and down there, even like the
Mhm.
Philippines have a great lore of paranormal kind of stuff. So I just feel like they could have opened it up to a wider extent, kind of like how the giant monsters did. So that
Mhm.
was like my only like critique of the episode. But at the same time, there's so much to cover with just Japan. I get to some extent why they just honed in on them.
This was probably my favorite episode just because, like you said, I realized how much stuff is out there that I haven't seen, and I felt like uncultured swine. So I was like, I gotta get cultured and watch some more Japanese horror. But yeah, like what George is saying, it would be good to have like a broader, but like I mean, they can just have an episode just for Korean horror, let alone every other place,
Exactly. Yeah.
Asian horror like that. There's so many like Korean horror movies too. So I hope there's gonna be more. But yeah, I love this was my favorite episode, I think.
I'm
I
curious, real
will.
quick. Do you guys actually consider Battle Royale a horror movie?
No.
Because
That's
I don't, and I thought it was weird that it was placed in there. It's a great movie.
I'm
I love it, but I don't know if it's horror.
I'm
I
trying to
don't. I don't.
think. I
I
mean,
didn't
I guess
consider
it's
it
just
horror.
thriller action.
Yeah, exactly. Thriller action is what I would put it under.
Going on to episode 4, kind of lightening up the mood a little bit, coming from that very dark Japanese horror. We had horror comedies here. So first of all, first question, and we'll start with you here, Marie. Are you a fan of horror comedies?
When I'm in the mood to watch a horror movie, I don't typically pick horror comedy because when I'm in the mood for horror, I want to feel terrible or scared or I want like more of a dark feeling. So if I'm in the mood for like just other movies, then I'll watch a horror comedy movie. I do like it. There are some horror comedies that I either really, 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 really love it, or I'm like, that just ain't for me. I feel like it's really hard thing to mix properly and have it like meld and gel properly, horror and comedy, because it's kind of broad, like how funny you gonna get, how scary you gonna get, how gross you gonna get, how deep you gonna get. It's got to be all that good. It's a hard combo to, for
So
me.
this was hit or miss for you, is
Yeah.
what you're
Tell what I'm doing with all my hand movements. Yeah.
What
She's trying
about
to
you, Drew?
recreate the Killer Clown's hand puppet scene.
Holy shit!
See, I haven't seen that, so I don't know.
God damn it!
I know.
Uh, yeah, hell yeah is what was my note was for that. Of course I love horror comedies, but I do. You put up a good point though, Marie, and I do agree with to some extent is that horror comedies are some of the hardest movies to make in the sense of actually nailing the horror that you can scare people and nailing the comedy at the same time. That's a fine line that most horror comedies fail at every time. They're generally just comedies that have references to horror things, like a monster or
Yep.
something like that. But they're just a comedy. That's the reality.
Mhm.
Like, a scary movie is a comedy.
Mhm.
That's it, plain and simple. But there's like a
Mhm.
handful that are actually both and just nail it perfectly. And which we'll probably talk about them within
Yeah.
later on these
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. I'm with you on this one, George. I love them. So there's specific kinds that I'm not a fan of, and here they touched on different types of horror comedies and kind of broke it down even deeper. And a term that I was not aware of, but now I am aware of it, and I know I don't like it. I'm not a fan of, and that is splatstick horror comedy. As I was going through, I was
Oh,
like, it was like, hey, I don't enjoy this. Not my fave. So now I know what to call it when it has like those type of movies. Besides that, like if you get a good movie that nails the horror and the comedy, like I feel like it's such an adventure as a viewer. If you can make me feel tension, but then you can also make me laugh at the same time. And I think that push and pull that you get between like both emotions can make those movies such a good experience to watch and add rewatchability to these movies because you're going through it. So like I definitely love them, but I agree they are harder to perfect, so they're fewer and far between to find real quality, good horror comedies. So I agree on that aspect. Now, out of all the movies listed in, boy, did they go through a lot of movies in this
yeah.
episode. I want to talk about the favorites. I'm gonna go first because I know you guys, one of you guys is gonna steal mine, and I'm gonna have to go with Shaun of the Dead was my favorite out of the ones mentioned. It. This
Okay,
is
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is one it doesn't get old for me. I've watched this movie so many times. It's still as entertaining. And just as they broke down in the episode, it's a movie that has you laughing throughout, but then when it gets time to like get down to business, it's a really good horror movie. And it's kind of like what he did also with his action movie in Hot Fuzz. It's like this is actually a really good action movie, but it's a really good comedy too. And Shaun of the Dead is a good comedy movie and it's a good horror movie, and it knows where to pick its places and add emotional value, add tension, but then also have you laughing your ass off. And everyone, the director, the cast, everyone kills it that put this movie together. So that was my favorite movie out of the ones that they listed. George, what was yours?
For me, it's Evil Dead 2. I should have brought my Necronomicon over here from my living room, but it's locked away right now, so the cats don't touch it. But like that's when you mentioned not liking Splatstick, I was like, that means you don't like Evil Dead 2. That like
It's not one of my
it's one of
favorites.
the
I
best.
don't dislike it.
To me,
Yeah,
that movie nails horror comedy because like the creatures, like the demonites, they're so like if you saw that in real life, it's scary. They're scary monsters. And this the views of the camera being the entity going around and everything has such a creepiness to it, but at the same time, freaking Bruce Campbell is comedy genius. Like that man could do no wrong. I love that movie deeply. It's so freaking good.
I do enjoy it more than like they mentioned that Alive and the Reanimator. I do enjoy that more than those. But with the slaps, I think when they start getting into the grotesque aspects for laughs, that doesn't really make me laugh.
So no
What
rivers of
about
blood for Jose.
Well, what about you, Marie? What was your favorite one listed?
Well, Shaun of the Dead is also my favorite. I think that movie is perfect, not just as a horror comedy, but as just a film. Like it's just perfection, beat by beat, scene after scene after scene. I just rewatched it this past weekend. I'm like, this movie is absolutely perfect, and I don't find it doesn't feel horror to me. I don't know. Maybe it's because I used to love zombie movies so much. I don't find zombie movies at all scary at all. But it's emotional, real life to your core horror, like having to off your mom and then having a dilemma where it's like, are we gonna off ourselves? Is our last, it's just a really like that's scary. That's scary. That's tension. So definitely Shaun of the Dead. I mean, Cabin in the Woods, I also think is pretty perfect for a horror comedy. Uh, but can I say one more thing? I forget what the questions are. I forget
There's
what
no
the
rules.
I forget what. No, wait, there are rules. I forget what the questions you're going to ask are, so I don't want to get ahead of myself again. So wait, favorite listed here, and you would add. Okay. But now, since watching this episode, I watched Tucker and Dale versus Evil, and I watched Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. These are both movies that
Oh,
Jose told me
really
to watch
good. Yeah.
years ago. And both of those movies are high up now in my list, like super, super duper high. I think those are two, again, perfect horror comedy movies. And there's some that I really on this list that I don't like either. And I think they are that splat stick. And I do love Evil Dead 2, but I prefer the first Evil Dead over Evil Dead 2 because I do find Evil Dead 2 too silly. So I think I'm kind of in where Jose is with the splat stick. I think Reanimator's overrated. Attempted to watch Dead Alive this past week and I couldn't get through it. I couldn't get through Return of the Living
Oh.
Dead. There's some of them
What?
I just can't.
What?
No. I was like this naked chick dancing for so long. I'm like, off. Like I just
Linnea
couldn't get it.
Quigley?
I'm not a boy.
Oh.
It just didn't work for me. It did not
I'm
work.
not
I'm
a
like, this
boy
is like,
either. I'm a
this is
man with needs.
people exactly. I'm not. So I was like, why is she naked for so long? I mean, full on naked, full on. I'm like, I don't want
Yeah.
to watch this. This is too dumb.
But yeah, you mentioned the Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and I love that movie. I go to it back like every year.
So
I think it's
underrated.
just I the fact that this movie does not get that much of that. I've been like crying about it on the podcast for since we started, being like, watch this, watch this.
Right?
I'm
I think we
glad
saw it
like
together, right? I think I remember watching it with you.
might have been. I just
Huh.
yeah, this movie is just it's so good. Like it's one of those movies just needs more more attention and more respect for
Yeah.
what it offers. And even just the way it was filmed. And this one of the things I actually like about Tucker and Dale is, it's not one steady way of filming throughout the entire thing. You get shifts, you know. In this, when he's doing the documentary and all that stuff, it looks like it's a found footage, like movie regular. But then when it switches to him in action, it switches the way it's filmed to it's filmed like a
Loved it.
horror movie.
Yeah.
And we got that same thing with Tucker and Dale. When it's from the kid's perspective, it looks like a darker tone, like horror movie. And then when it's from Tucker and Dale's perspective, you've got like the lighter a color palette and everything like that. And like I feel like that just creates such a good atmosphere for the viewer, and you're seeing that contrast that both sides of the characters are seeing. And speaking of that, they went through a ton of movies in this. Was there any movie horror comedies that you thought like, wait, this I feel like this is missing?
Creep
Creepshow.
Show.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they talked about Creep
Yeah.
Show. And okay, Creep Show to me, well, I watched it when I was a kid, but to me, has the scariest bits for any horror comedy I've seen because the crate, man, that
Yeah.
that Fluffy scared me when I was a kid. I mean, I loved the fear, but it scared me. Then Father's Day, like the makeup, like Tom Savini with all freaking effects in that movie, like that movie's a horror like that horror legends all over that movie, and it's just they should have mentioned that. I don't know why Creepshow didn't get much love.
Yeah, I
It's
think they
true.
showed an image at one point, but they didn't really like get into it and talk about it. It should have been
No,
one of the featured movies.
It's surprising
no,
on
I think
two
so.
fronts because there's two episodes that should have mentioned Creepshow, and it's but a blip.
I know. And Creepshow was the first horror movie I ever watched that made me love horror. That's why I got the blanket, I got the shirt on. I owe everything to Creepshow. So I wanted to see some more love for it, and I didn't in the series. And I'm like, oh man.
What about you, George? Was there a movie that you would add that you felt wasn't mentioned?
Man, I made a list. I made a list of movies that they should
Mm,
have had.
hmm
I've mentioned Dead Time Stories 1,000 times over on this podcast, so I'm gonna go with the fact that just the obvious, Freddy and Chucky. Like Freddy and Chuck, like I thought that should have been a subject matter
Oh
where
yeah.
movies that started off serious became horror comedies. The fact that that was never addressed, like my favorite horror film with like the top five and of Freddy films is The Dream Warriors, and
Mm.
it's the one that was the best. At the same time, it started something. It turned that franchise into a new thing. And like you don't watch a Freddy movie without laughing. You don't watch a Chucky movie without laughing. Like you're waiting for the punchline. It's no longer like the kill line. So no, it's the punchline. How's it gonna make this kill funny? And the fact that they didn't actually address that in any way, that's a great topic.
Oh, I agree. Honestly, I didn't even think of that, but you are 100% right on that one. They should have included those there, or at least in passing, mention
Yeah.
it. Like there wasn't even an image of it. One that I thought they should have added, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I missed it, but the Dawn of the Dead remake.
I have that on my list too. Jose,
Yeah,
The Zack
I
Snyder one?
agree.
yeah, the Zack Snyder
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
That was a good blend of both horror and
Yeah.
comedy from the very start. They mentioned Return of the Living Dead. Honestly, I prefer this one over that one.
Yes. I
But
agree.
yeah, Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite horror comedy movies, one of my favorite zombie movies in general. But yeah, I feel like that should have been in there. But what was everyone's overall thoughts on this episode? I felt this is one of the most in-depth episodes because they covered so many movies. I think it covered more movies than all the other episodes in here. I was like listing the movies that we're covering, and it was close to 20 movies that they like verbally touched on
Yeah.
within this episode. What about you, Joel? What were your thoughts on this episode?
Uh, I agree that they're very good about pointing out little things. I feel like they really shined a light on directors, which was nice. Like mentioning that like the Dan O'Bannon's first movie was Return of the Dead and everything, and how we blew it out of the park. But I felt like they kind of just missed the fact that there's writers that create these stories. And a big important thing is that one of the co-writers of Dawn of the Dead, which is or Night of the Living Dead, which is the most, celebrated zombie movie ever, was Joe Russo. Joe Russo is also the writer of Return of the Living Dead. And so that's such an important thing. It's like this guy left George Romero's franchise and created his own zombie franchise, and it became something. Like there's like easily like 3 to 4 films of Return of the Living Dead and like their own thing, and they're all really fun and enjoyable. They just have more of the comedic approach as opposed to like the serious thing. And I
Shows the versatility of the writer.
Yeah, and he actually
Mm.
he kept on making like he had a movie that came out a few years back where like he was actually in it, and I think it's like My Grandfather's a Zombie or something like that. Full comedy, really schlocky and everything. But like he's still in the business. He's still doing these things. That's why I was
Mm.
kind of like sad that you guys don't like Return of the Living Dead. Like I got like a signed poster from the guy. It's one of my favorites. But yeah, I thought that was disappointing. Like I feel like that's such a noteworthy thing, that he had 2 zombie hits and no talk about it.
What was your overall thoughts on the episode, Marie?
I liked it. It was like a polarizing thing for me because on one hand I was like, "Ooh, I love this movie so much," and it also introduced me to movies I love so much. And then there were some where I was like, no, oh God, no." And then it introduced me to a movie, and I'm like, "I gotta watch this movie." And I tried to watch it, and I'm like, "I can't watch this movie." I couldn't get. I'm gonna retry to get through Dead Alive. I'm gonna try
It's so
again.
good.
I was,
It's so good.
I don't see how it's like good. It's just like, whoa, like I don't know. I don't know.
Did you
I
get to
was
the
just like,
priest?
how yes, I did. That was funny. I laughed. It was just so like aggressive that
Yeah.
and there's so many close-up shots to faces and like underneath where I was just like, I'm getting but not in a good way. Not in a good uncomfortable. I was like getting anxious, like, oh, this is making me feel not good. So yeah, it was a good episode. I liked it.
Moving on from episode 4, going on to the finale, the last episode, which aired recently, and that is an episode that revolved around Stephen King adaptations. Funny enough, also another episode that we covered here
Yep.
last October. It was Stephen King adaptations. So overall, I feel the first question that needs to be asked is what is you guys' overall view on his adaptations in general? Marie, we'll start with you because I believe you were not part of our
Yeah.
episode last year, so you got a new opinion that we haven't heard.
It's hard for me to say what I like think about his adaptations because I have never read a Stephen King book. So I don't know how closely related most of these movies are to the book, so I can't be like, wow, they did that book justice with this. I only know like what Stephen King thinks about some of the movies, and what like the public thinks about some of the movies. There are many Stephen King adaptation movies that I really love and adore, and they're like deep in my soul. And there's just some of them that may be a little hokey, but I need to give them another chance. Like there's ones that I saw so many as a kid. Okay, my uncle was in love with Stephen King. He had all of his, not in love, but he obsessed. He had all his books, and he had a whole drawer of VHSs that were just Stephen King movies. So I started when I was young with Stephen King. So I saw as a kid Silver Bullet, Salem's Lot, Thinner, Cujo. Now when we learn it, stop. And I don't remember them that much. And I remember as a kid being like, these are boring. Like, where put Creepshow back on. So I need to rewatch them because I think I can like appreciate them a little more. So that's my feelings.
So
What
you
what
like
about
when
you,
Stephen
Joy?
King writes a movie, like if he writes a screenplay for a movie like Creepshow, that's a winner.
Well, but there's movies I love that are based on books that he wrote that I feel like I mean like The Shine's my favorite horror movies ever, but like they say in the show, that's not really a Stephen King
Yeah,
movie.
yeah,
It's that Stanley Kubrick movie, which I thought was a very good quote. If he's attached to it, I'll be interested. There you
yeah.
go.
Well, to move off onto that, I think that even the worst Stephen King like movie, like adaptation movie, always has something to talk about. You know, if it's good, then it's like, all right, great, we're celebrating it. It was good. But even when it's bad, there's something there, whether it's like the idea of the story or sometimes how the filmmaker decided to do something with it, and you're just like, why did they do that? You know, like I feel like there's always just something because he gives you such a great description of the setting and the characters and everything, and his ideas are decently unique while at the same time being relatable for a lot of people, where like you just don't know what the filmmaker's going to do. Like they're always going to do something to interpret their way and get their piece on it, and it's like
Mm.
something weird will happen. Sometimes that weird
Mm.
is great, like it, and sometimes it's weird, like the Langoliers. You know, like it's just there's always something. So I think there's something special about Stephen King adaptations.
I share the sentiments that were kind of portrayed on the episode. Like I feel there's so many adaptations, and as movies, they tend to be very hit or miss.
Hmm.
They're all over the spectrum, all the way from horrifically bad to absolutely amazing classics. He's literally hit every avenue of the spectrum across. I think you can actually make a movie rating using Stephen King movies. It's just
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
go from there. So, and it's funny that, he's known for horror, but I personally do agree with what they said in the episode where his best adaptations are non-horror movies. So I feel that's always like very ironic. In fact, that I think if you ask people who maybe are not cinephiles or anything like that, they might not even know that some of these non-horror movies that are considered classics came from his writing.
Yeah.
So I feel that that's always interesting. In the episode, they covered a lot of things. They covered a lot of his movies. Was there any highlights and anything also that you may have disagreed with that was talked about within the movie? George, we'll start with you.
I love that they put a highlight on his cameos. Being
Yeah.
when it's kind of goes like back to that Clint Howard thing. Like as a kid watching his movies, I love seeing him pop. Well, he's not an actor. He's not a good actor, you know. He's kind of goofy. My first introduction to him was Creepshow, you know, and seeing him in that, and it's just like this guy's so bad, but he's so like funny. Still, like I feel like he knows it. I think he's fully aware of it. It's kind of like Stan Lee. Like he was the first Stan Lee to some extent. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like you're watching a thing
And
with
and,
it,
and
and
M
you're
Night.
waiting. And
M
M Night,
Night.
yeah.
Yeah, M Night. Yeah.
But like M Night's the filmmaker, so like he could put himself in the movie, you know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
being the writer, like the writer doesn't get shine like that, you know? And so like it's became like this thing. It's like, is he gonna pop up? Who's he gonna be? Like is he gonna be the ice cream man? You know? So it's like
Hmm.
this nice little fun game that got incorporated into the movies, whether they knew it or not. And I really enjoyed that.
Was there anything that you disagreed with?
I definitely learned something thanks to his son. I wasn't aware that the original name was actually Kuho.
Mm-mm.
Oh yeah, I didn't
So
know
that
that either.
was, yeah. As much
Yeah.
as my mom would actually call it that, because my mom, like, she's very keen on just using Spanish pronunciations for everything. And so I thought that was interesting. It's like, huh, she was right this whole time.
Mm.
It would be Kuho from now on.
Right?
That's it.
Cool. Hmm.
Yeah. What do you about you, Marie? What was one of the highlights of the episode and anything that you may have disagreed with?
Hey, I just want to touch a little bit on the cameo thing. Um, when's the last time you watched Creep Show? Is my question.
Me, I watched it last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, to
I
me,
have all
when I
three on DVD, so I watch the
okay,
first two every year.
okay. So to me, the Jordy Verrill uh, part of Creep Show, when I was a kid, it was one of my least favorite ones because I'm like, give me the monsters, give me the gore. But now, as an adult, I'm like, I think he's actually amazing in that role. I think he does such a good job. I know it's like really goofy, over the top, but I think he actually, like, I watch it now, I'm like, damn, he's actually acting his butt off. But they missed the cameo in Creepshow too when he's a semi truck driver at the
Yeah.
They missed that one. I was waiting. I'm like, show him in Creepshow 2, and they never did. Doesn't get any love. The Creepshow franchise got no love. Anyway,
Mm.
I like that they highlighted the Green Mile, even though it's not technically horror. The Green Mile is one of my favorite Stephen King adaptation movies. Um, because I think that one of the most horrific things I've seen in any movie ever, if we're talking about horror, is when Percy doesn't wet that sponge. And that scene with the electric chair, I that is one of the most horrific scenes I've ever seen in anything. So I'm glad they touched on that. That was a highlight. Another highlight was when the director of Thinner, was named Tom Holland. Is that his name?
Yeah. Yeah,
Tom
Tom
Holland?
Holland. Yeah.
When the director of
Also
Thinner
known
said
as
that he wanted,
Spider-Man.
that's why I'm like, I want to make sure I get this right. When when he said that he originally was the lover of Zendaya. Just kidding. Just joking. No, when he said that he wanted to keep the ending of Thinner like true to the book, but then audiences didn't like it, so he had the pressure from like the studios telling him to change it. I love when he said he felt like a whore to the audience. I was like, oh, this guy's legit. This guy's
Yeah.
the best. Like he feels so terrible like selling his, not
Yeah.
selling his soul, but changing what he believed was right for the audience. So that was another highlight for me.
Yeah, he showered for days after that in hot water
Yeah.
with Okay, was there anything in the episode that you disagreed with?
Yeah, that Doctor Sleep is a good movie.
Oh,
Oh, I know
I
that
didn't.
okay.
that's a controversial movie. So
Yeah, it definitely is. I
Yeah,
liked it.
I haven't
I
seen it
wasn't a
yet.
fan. Okay, I wasn't a fan of Doctor Sleep. I don't know. And also when they brushed over 1408, and I gave tried to give that movie another chance too, and I didn't like that movie either. But those are things I disagreed with. That's personal preference though.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys mentioned a couple of the highlights that I had. Another one that I had here is I'm glad they gave some respect to the Mist. Like I enjoy the
Yeah.
Mist, and I feel the Mist doesn't get any respect. Like that movie is very well done. You've got good characters to root for and good characters to hate, and that ending to this day is still like sticks in my head. The way that and the fact not just that it ended that way, that they were willing to pull the trigger and make the movie end that way.
Yeah.
That's something you
Legit.
don't really see much these days because like Tom Holland's spoke of with Dinner is a lot of times there's pressure to give the happy cookie cutter ending that's going to make the audience happy. There was no whoring for the audience. And so I'm glad that they gave that movie some respect. That's one that I revisit here and there, and I think it's underrated. One things I didn't agree with, and one of them mentioned when they were talking about The Shining, and they were saying, uh, basically one of the things that they didn't like about The Shining, it was just they were kind of hinting at that Jack Torrance being a one-dimensional character in the movie,
Mm.
Hmm.
unlike the book, and I didn't really agree with that. Like I feel you see a transition of Jack's character throughout the movie from where he starts to like where he ends. you know, there is some sort of progression. I don't feel he's the same person from beginning to end. So like that, I didn't really agree with.
I kind of got what they were coming from with that, just in the sense it's like the thing we talked about before with like the episode with when you get that actor and you see them, it's like that guy's a bad guy, you know. Jack Nicholson kind of gave off this thing where it's just like he I watch The Shining and I don't sympathize with him. Like he doesn't come off
Oh
as
yeah, no.
sympathetic. And I guess in the
Mhm.
book he is more sympathetic. Like he has moments in the book where you can actually feel for him and then you see that transgression into who he becomes. That didn't I don't think I guess the movie didn't have that much of a hard hit in that essence. And I get that, honestly. When I see Jack Nicholson, it's like, yeah, he's that guy. Yeah, you know. Like it's not a surprise that he turns into this guy. So like I kind of give it to them. If anything, I liked that the guy who mentions it, like that he doesn't like the movie, that he's against The Shining and he loves the book and all that kind of stuff. But then he gives props to what the movie does and what it is. So
Mhm.
it's like, all right, they actually have someone who's being contrarian. Like this is the one episode of the bunch where like I felt like they weren't full on just celebrating everything. Like there was little
Yeah.
notes of like, I wish this had happened instead. You know, so I kind of like that they actually had the gusto to do that, as opposed to like everything's good.
Which
Mhm.
is perfect for this episode because if when we're talking about Stephen King adaptations, there is that push and pull again between the
Yeah.
bad and the good. So it was the perfect episode to actually like have that. And honestly, if he would have
Mhm.
worded it how you worded it, then I wouldn't have disagreed as much. But you know, I think it's the way that he worded it made
Yeah.
it look like sound like the character does have no changes at all throughout the whole movie, and that I can't agree with. But the other aspect of the fact that like this character isn't sympathetic at any point, beginning or end, that is true. So
Mm.
I mean, not everyone has my gift, you know.
gifts of the gab. Uh,
Mhm.
no, but overall, I feel that this was also a good episode. I like you know it focuses on the best adaptations. It doesn't really touch on a lot of the ones that you kind of ignore, the ones you don't touch. So in that way, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, it is one dimensional where it's like the focus is on the best, you know, not on the other one.
Mhm.
So it's not a true episode on the Stephen King adaptations. It's more on the best of Stephen King adaptations overall. And I do also I had it for my answer for this question, and Marie, you mentioned it, is I like how you know they revealed the alternate endings and how they preferred to do it, and just kind of giving us a little insight on you know what they wanted to do and how they wanted to pull in aspects of the books and why
Mhm.
that aspect was so different when it comes to the movie. I like that aspect because you know we don't always get a lot of information when they're adapting these books on what goes into the mindset of what to keep or not to keep, what to change, what to keep, you know, and all that aspect. So I enjoyed that about the episode. What was y'all's overall thoughts on the episode, Marie?
I really enjoyed this episode, and it did put more on my list of movies to watch. And I've never seen The Mist. And I saying to Jose, like, man, I like the show, but there were spoilers. Even though these movies are so old, it's on me that they're spoilers. But goddamn, the ending of The Mist. Oh God, my husband and I were like, yeah, we won't watch it, but oh my God, like that's too much. I just like what an epic ending. It also, I've never seen Christine, and it made me really like
Oh,
I'm dying to watch Christine. I know it looks gorgeous, and like John Carpenter, why haven't I seen it? I don't know, just whatever. But I'm dying to see Christine. Now I want to see Dead Zone because like anything to do with like the end of there being like political corruption, I'm like, sign me up. Like sign me up. I want to see it for that. And I haven't seen Misery and I want to see Misery. You guys, I'm way behind.
Oh my
I
God,
you know
know,
what?
I
This
know,
isn't
I
even
know,
your
I
fault.
know.
This is Dan's fault for wasting your time with whatever crap he's giving you to watch on your show.
He gives me things like no one's ever heard of, and I'm like, okay, yeah, why are you not giving me it's
You
supposed to be popular
got
movies. He's giving me
classics that
Blood
you got
In,
to
Blood
catch up
Out.
on. You got
What's Blood In, Blood
Hey, whoa,
Out?
whoa, whoa,
That's
that's
the
a
one
good
I have to
movie.
watch
That's a
next.
good movie.
I
You got
haven't
to watch
watched it
that.
though.
Yeah, you got.
I've never heard of it. So yeah, I like this episode a lot. I love seeing his son in it too, and I just, and his son that he was in Creep Show. Why are they not talking about Creep Show? He's the kid at the beginning of Creep Show. Talk
This is a
about
no
it.
creep show zone. No creep show
Yeah.
zone.
It's my
It's because
baby.
Creepshow's not an adaptation. I get why they didn't talk about it in this. Like that was something he wrote originally just for the
Yeah,
movie, but it didn't get
yeah,
any love. They need an episode. I
no,
mean, Creepshow was a show that's on Shudder. That's
exactly.
come
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Well, with that being said, before we close out here, I want everyone's overall thoughts on this series as a whole, but then also thinking forward, if they are to do more seasons, are there anything else that you would want them to touch on besides a whole episode on Creepshow? So start starting with you, George. What's your overall thoughts and what would you like to see going forward?
I mean, overall thoughts, I really enjoyed it. Like this, it's very relative for someone like myself. I worked on a magazine that did this every month, with stuff like this, talking about horror and breaking it down and just celebrating it. A lot of the celebrities that were on here, we've had the pleasure of talking to and interviewing, and it was just nice seeing them. Like David Mountain being on there. Like this is a guy who loves horror so much.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
glad that he's on there
Mm,
getting to just like express his love for it. And that was just really
yeah.
fun. And I love seeing more of that. It's nice seeing people who are in the industry be fans of the thing that they're doing, or be fans of the thing in a way that we are too. It really makes it more relatable, and it kind of humanizes the whole experience. It's not like this otherworldly thing. It's like, oh yeah, it's something I can do too. Kind of forget about that sometimes. So I really like that. I like celebrating the craft. Something they should highlight. I mean, there's so many things. I don't even know what the one thing you could pick. I mean, I feel like we've kind of addressed it already. There should be a Korean horror episode. There should be movies that started off serious that became comedies. Like there's so many
Mm.
different things. Maybe directors that have been the best at it. Like in the Stephen King one, they should have mentioned that Frank Darabont is possibly the best Stephen King adaptation director. He did like three of the best ones that we know. Like he's mentioned The Mist and The Green Mile, and then there was also Shawshank Redemption. Like that man understands Stephen King in a way that no one else obviously does. So there could be an episode like that, just celebrating the people who just nail it every time.
Well, I love anything that showcases a passion behind horror. I'm all for it. And this is the people who made the 101 scariest horror, that long ass title. They made
Mhm.
this show as well, right? And like anything that's going to introduce me to more horror movies, because I found one of my favorite horror movies ever from that show, the 101 scariest, but like Exorcist 3. Found that from there. I found so many movies I love from this. I should have listened to Jose in the first place, but I found them because of the show too. It reminded me. So I love shows like this. I want there to be more seasons. I want there to be more TV shows celebrating horror like this and introducing me to more things, because clearly I haven't seen barely anything. But was something I'd want to see, like George said, yeah, different places around the world. What, Canadian horror? No, just kidding. I'm just joking. I mean, there's gotta
Oh,
be some out there.
stabbed you. I'm sorry.
Oh, and you know what? Black Christmas. That's a Canadian horror movie. Also, I think there should be there could be lots of things like best sequels or trilogies. Um, they can do a whole Final Girl episode. They can do like a sci-fi, like what about aliens? What about demons, possession? Like, and they can do everything. It's like endless, endless.
Overall, I found it entertaining to watch. I feel like
Mhm.
this show serves as good, nostalgia if you're a horror fan
Mhm.
because they cover so many of the things that we've watched and we've loved. But then even as we have three people here who are big horror fans, and it gave us things to visit, after we finished the show because there's so much horror out there that as much as we watch, there's still things that we're missing. So it's good to have these shows that kind of brings you back, gives you that like, oh, I remember that feeling, but also gives you like, ooh, okay, I gotta check that. That might become a new favorite horror movie. So I think it did a good balance of all of that. There's definitely room for future seasons and different topics they can cover. You guys mentioned a lot of things. a lot of things. There's other subgenres. They covered horror comedy, Japanese horror. You can get into other subgenres when it comes to horror, besides just like locations too. But then maybe you can even cover eras
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
horror. 80s horror. You can do like 70s horror, because horror has evolved so much over time that if you cover some of these eras, you can see like the difference. So they can go for a long time after this. So overall, I feel just like their other show that they made with the long title that Marie was mentioning, they're doing it right. Give me all of it as much as you can. Keep putting it out. It's definitely worth the watch if you are a horror fan. If you're not a horror fan, it might still be worth the watch because you can get some recommendations, but just be careful because some of these movies may be spoiled before you actually
Hmm.
get to watch them. So make sure you keep that in mind. With that being said, thank you for joining us here as we discuss Shudder's new show, Horror's Greatest. If you haven't checked it out, make sure to check it out. We continue the month of October. Make sure you tune into our channel, as we're gonna be covering horror topics pretty much for the whole month. Even though we watch all year, we make sure we focus in October on what is important, and that is horror. So tune into both our NASS shows, our bonus episodes, and our Marie Explains It All for this month. I explains it. I'm
Explains
thinking
it
Clarissa explains it all. No.
I do explain it all though. Like I do.
You do talk to the camera too, so yeah.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, our Marie Plays It All, who's going to be dropping episodes all this month. I have been your host for this episode, Jose. You can find our episode on all platforms, Apple, Spotify. You can find us on social media, Instagram, Twitter/X. Make sure you let us know if you've watched this show. What were your thoughts on the show? That being said, we will say goodbye.
I have not been your host. You can get a 7-day free trial of Shudder if you don't have one yet. That's what I did. Follow me at
Definitely.
Nicolopolis.
Worth it.
Link
and
I'll put the link in the bottom.
Yeah.
Sponsor us, Shudder. Sponsor us.
Right, we're not sponsored by them. They're just a great
No.
streaming service.
Yep.
They will be now. And I'm Marie. Show Creep. Show some love, people. Come on.
We might have to do
Making
an
out.
episode of Creep Show to make up for it.
We really
I
do,
could talk about that
because
thing for an hour.
I want to talk about part 3 because most people don't know about part 3.
I purposely haven't watched it, but I want to watch it now. I'll watch it for you, George.
Oh man, it's such a piece of crap.
Yeah, that's
Well, you heard it here. Stay tuned for that. Again, thank you for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe and leave any comments below.